To humiliate me, my boss fired me on Christmas Eve in front of a packed restaurant. Then I revealed who I really was, and his world collapsed in seconds.
Hello friends, please join me as I share the incredible story of how one man's cruelty on the holiest night of the year became the moment he lost everything he thought he controlled. Before we dive into this journey, please kindly hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and share this video with anyone who needs to hear that karma is real and justice still exists. I would love to know where you're watching this from. Drop your location in the comments. Your support means the world to me. Thank you. Now to the story. Her name was Alexis Brooks, and she was 28 years old. If you had met her 14 months earlier, you wouldn't have recognized her. Back then, she was a woman living in two worlds, one of private jets and penthouse suites, the other of greasy aprons and aching feet. She had deliberately chosen to walk away from everything that defined her, trading designer gowns for a second-hand waitress uniform, and a corner office for a cramped studio apartment. But Alexis Brooks wasn't running away from her life. She was preparing to truly claim it. 2 years before that fateful Christmas Eve, Alexis sat in a mahogany-paneled office, reading her father's will for the third time. James Brooks, the self-made billionaire who'd built an empire from nothing, had left her everything, $4.7 billion worth of hotels, restaurants, real estate, and investment firms spanning 3 continents. But there was a condition, one single paragraph that would change the trajectory of her entire life. Before you take the throne, Alexis, you must understand what it means to work for someone who doesn't know your name. Only then will you know how to lead with wisdom instead of just wealth. Her father's attorney, Margaret Chun, had watched Alexis's face as she read those words. Your father was very specific about this, Ms. Brooks. He wanted you to experience what he experienced when he started with nothing. Alexis had stared out the window of the 47th floor office, looking down at the city below. Somewhere down there, people were working jobs where they weren't appreciated, serving bosses who saw them as disposable, fighting every day just to be seen as human. Her father had been one of those people once, bussing tables and washing dishes while dreaming of something bigger. How long? Alexis had asked quietly. He suggested at least a year. At one of the businesses the investment firm owns, but where management doesn't know about the ownership structure. And so, Alexis Brooks had disappeared. She'd told her friends she was taking an extended sabbatical to find herself in Europe. She'd instructed her board of directors that she'd be unavailable for the next 18 months, with Margaret handling all decisions. She'd packed away her $15,000 dresses and her diamond jewelry. She'd traded her penthouse with a view for a studio apartment in a modest neighborhood where the radiator clanked and the neighbors argued through thin walls. The woman who stared back at her from the mirror on her first morning in that apartment looked like a stranger. No makeup artist. No stylist. Just Alexis, learning to French braid her own hair for the first time in her adult life. The Evergreen Supper Club had been one of dozens of restaurants that Brooks Global Investments held through a complex series of subsidiary companies. It was successful, profitable, and according to the quarterly reports, well managed. The general manager, Michael Butler, had been running it for 5 years with impressive numbers. What the quarterly reports didn't show was how he achieved those numbers. Alexis's first day at the Evergreen Supper Club, she'd walked in through the back entrance at 4:30 p.m. for her interview with Michael. The kitchen was already bustling, the air thick with the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread. A chef with silver hair and tired eyes, Raymond she'd later learn, had glanced at her and nodded toward the office. Michael Butler had looked her up and down with an expression that made her skin crawl. Not sexual exactly, but assessing her like a piece of equipment. Could she carry heavy trays? Would she complain about the hours? Would she last more than a month? You're here to serve, not to think, he'd said flatly, not even asking about her experience. Do your job, keep your head down, and maybe you'll last longer than the last girl. Welcome to Evergreen. Your shift starts tomorrow at 5. No onboarding. No training. Just show up. Alexis had smiled politely and said, Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Butler." He'd waved her away without another word. That night, back in her studio apartment, Alexis had called Margaret. "I think I understand why Dad wanted me to do this." "Already?" Margaret had sounded surprised. "I've been at this job for exactly 7 minutes, and I already feel invisible. Like I don't matter. Like I'm just a body filling a uniform." She'd paused, staring at the waitress outfit hanging on her closet door. "And if I feel like this after 7 minutes, knowing who I really am and that I can leave any time I want, imagine how people feel when this is their only option." "Your father felt that way for 8 years, Margaret had said softly. "He washed dishes, bussed tables, and got yelled at by men who made in a year what he'd later make in an hour. He never forgot it." "I won't forget it either," Alexis had promised. The first month had been brutal. Her feet ached in ways she'd never imagined. She dropped trays, mixed up orders, and once spilled an entire bottle of red wine on the floor during the dinner rush. The other servers had been kind, covering for her mistakes, teaching her the rhythms of the restaurant. But Michael had been merciless. "You cost us a $300 bottle of wine, Alex," he'd said, using the shortened name she'd given on her application. "That's coming out of your tips." It was illegal, of course. But Alexis had said nothing, just cleaned up the mess and worked harder. She'd watched Michael closely over those first weeks. Watched how he pocketed cash from the register when he thought no one was looking. Watched how he blamed the kitchen staff for problems he'd created. Watched how he humiliated a server named Sophie for asking for time off to take her daughter to a doctor's appointment. "Your personal life isn't my problem," he told Sophie in front of the entire staff. "You want the job? Show up. Or I'll find someone who will." Sophie had shown up, exhausted and worried, and later confided in Alexis during their break that she couldn't afford to lose this job. She was a single mother, working 2 jobs, and barely making rent. That night, Alexis had added Sophie's name to a growing list in a private notebook, "People Michael has hurt." Next to each name, she documented the abuse. Stolen tips. Unfair firings. Sexual harassment from customers that Michael ignored. Health code violations he overlooked to save money. By month 3, Alexis had become good at the job. Really good. She'd learned to read customers, anticipate their needs, handle difficult situations with grace. She'd built relationships with regulars who requested her section. She'd earned the respect of the kitchen staff, who appreciated that she never blamed them for mistakes that weren't theirs. And Michael Butler had started to hate her for it. "You're making the other servers look bad," he told her one night, his breath reeking of the whiskey he drank while watching the floor. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Butler." "You're doing too much," he'd snapped. "Dial it back." But Alexis couldn't dial it back. Not when she saw how much her co-workers were struggling. Not when she watched Marcus, a server who'd been there for 15 years, get shortchanged on his tips week after week. Not when she heard Raymond in the kitchen, quietly crying after Michael had berated him for a dish that a customer had loved but Michael claimed was substandard. By month 14, Alexis had everything she needed. Photos of Michael's theft. Recordings of his verbal abuse. Witness statements from staff who'd finally trusted her enough to speak up. A paper trail of health code violations that could shut the restaurant down if reported. Margaret had reviewed everything during one of their secret monthly meetings at a cafe across town. "This is more than enough, Ms. Brooks. You could fire him tomorrow and no one would question it." "Not yet," Alexis had said, sipping her coffee, black, 2 sugars, the way she'd learned to drink it during early morning shifts. "He's planning something. I can feel it." "How do you know?" "Because he's been watching me differently lately. Not just with annoyance. With calculation. He wants me gone, but he wants it to hurt." Margaret had studied her carefully. "And you want to be ready when he makes his move." "I want him to make his move," Alexis had corrected. "I want him to show everyone exactly who he is. And then I want to show everyone exactly who I am. The Christmas season had arrived with its usual chaos. The Evergreen Supper Club was booked solid every night, with parties and celebrations filling every table. The kitchen worked overtime. The servers ran themselves ragged. And Michael Butler watched it all from his usual perch at the bar, drinking whiskey and counting money. Alexis had noticed something different in his expression when he looked at her now. A kind of gleeful anticipation. She'd seen that look before, usually right before he fired someone. On December 20th, she'd pulled Margaret aside during a break and sent a single text, "Soon. Maybe Christmas Eve." Margaret's response had been immediate, "Ready when you are." On December 23rd, Michael had posted the Christmas Eve schedule. Alexis saw her name assigned to the main floor, the busiest, most demanding section on the restaurant's biggest night of the year. Sophie had patted her shoulder sympathetically. "Good luck tomorrow. Christmas Eve is insane." But Alexis had just smiled. Because she knew something Sophie didn't. Something no one except Margaret knew. Tomorrow wasn't just Christmas Eve. Tomorrow was the day Michael Butler's world would end. That night, Alexis had gone home to her studio apartment and made 2 phone calls. The first was to Margaret, "Have the papers ready. Have security on standby. And make sure you can get there within 20 minutes of my call." The second was to her mother, Victoria Brooks, who was spending the holidays in their family's estate in the Hamptons. "Mom, tomorrow night, I'm going to do what Dad asked me to do." Victoria's voice had been warm with pride. "He'd be so proud of you, darling. Not just for what you're about to do, but for what you've already done." After hanging up, Alexis had pulled out something she'd been saving for this moment, a dress she'd purchased months ago when she'd first sensed that the confrontation was coming. Red, elegant, designer. The kind of dress that said power without saying a word. She'd hung it on the outside of her closet next to her waitress uniform. Tomorrow, she'd walk into the Evergreen Supper Club as Alex the waitress. But she'd leave as Alexis Brooks, CEO. And Michael Butler? He'd leave with nothing. Christmas Eve morning, Alexis woke before dawn. The city was still dark, but she could see the first hints of snow beginning to fall outside her window. She made herself coffee, black, 2 sugars, and sat by the window, watching the world wake up. Her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Everything is in place. Are you ready?" Alexis typed back, "More than ready." At 4:45 p.m., she arrived at the Evergreen Supper Club through the back entrance, just like she had for the past 14 months. The kitchen was already in full chaos. Raymond looked up and gave her a tired smile. "Merry Christmas Eve, Alex." "Merry Christmas, Raymond," she replied, meaning it more than he knew. She tied her apron, pinned her name tag, Alex, to her uniform, and took a deep breath. Through the swinging door, she could see the dining room already filling with families, couples, parties. The Christmas tree in the corner sparkled with lights. Festive music played softly. And at the bar, Michael Butler sat watching the floor with his usual glass of whiskey, waiting for his moment. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Alexis Brooks had been waiting for this moment even longer. At exactly 5 p.m., the first customers were seated in her section. The night had begun. And in just a few hours, everything Michael Butler thought he knew about power, control, and consequences would shatter like glass on a stone floor. The stage was set. The players were in position. And Christmas Eve at the Evergreen Supper Club was about to become a night no one would ever forget. The restaurant hummed with life and laughter, the air thick with the scent of roasted meat and pine. Alexis balanced a tray of wine glasses, her movements practiced and fluid after 14 months of perfecting the role. Across the dining room, Michael Butler's eyes tracked her every move, his expression darkening with each compliment she received, each smile she drew from a customer. He'd been planning this for weeks, she knew. Tonight was meant to be her humiliation. But what Michael Butler didn't realize was that he'd been walking into her trap all along. And as the clock ticked toward 9:47 p.m., The moment that would change both their lives forever was rapidly approaching. But to understand what was about to happen, you need to understand the man who thought he was untouchable. Michael Butler wasn't born cruel. He learned it. And over 5 years, he perfected it. He'd arrived at the Evergreen Supper Club with a resume that gleamed and references that sang his praises. The absentee owners, Alexis's own investment firm, operating through layers of corporate anonymity, had hired him based on a single interview and a track record of turning restaurants profitable. What they didn't know was that Michael's profits came with a hidden cost, one paid in human dignity. His philosophy was simple, brutal, and effective: staff are replaceable. Profits are not. He lived well on that philosophy. Designer suits. A luxury apartment downtown. A car that cost more than most of his servers made in 2 years. All funded by corners cut, tips skimmed, and people broken. Alexis had been working at the Evergreen for 3 months when she met Maria Rodriguez. Maria was 34, a single mother of 2 boys, and she'd been serving tables at the restaurant for 3 years. She was quiet, efficient, and desperately needed every shift she could get. It was early December, and Maria had approached Michael during the pre-shift meeting. Alexis watched from across the room as Maria wrung her hands nervously. "Mr. Butler, I need to request Christmas Eve off. My son's school is doing a holiday play and he has the lead role. It's really important to him." Michael had looked up from his clipboard, his expression flat. "Christmas Eve is our busiest night of the year." "I know, sir. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. He's been practicing for months and—" "Let me make this simple for you, Maria." Michael's voice had dropped to that particular tone he used when he wanted everyone to hear. "Your kids or your job. Choose." The room had gone silent. Maria's face had crumbled. "But I need this job. I'm just asking for one night. And I'm just asking for an employee who understands priorities. What's it going to be?" Alexis had gripped the edge of the table, every instinct screaming to intervene. But she'd forced herself to stay quiet, to watch, to document. Blowing her cover wouldn't help Maria in the long run. But what she was building would. I choose my son," Maria had whispered. "Then clean out your locker. You're done." Maria had left in tears, not even waiting to collect her final paycheck. The other servers had stood in shocked silence, and Michael had simply returned to his clipboard as if nothing had happened. That night, Alexis had called Margaret from her apartment, her voice shaking with rage. "Add Maria Rodriguez to the list. 3 years of service. Fired for being a mother. I want full back pay plus $50,000 in damages." "Noted," Margaret had replied. "We're building quite a case." "Good. Because when this is over, I want him to feel every bit of the pain he's caused." By her 6th month, Alexis had figured out Michael's system. Every Friday night, after the dinner rush, he'd count the cash tips. The servers pooled 20% for the kitchen and support staff, standard practice. But what wasn't standard was the extra 15% Michael pocketed for himself before the count even began. She'd watched him do it one night, standing in the doorway to his office. His back was to the door, and his hands moved quickly, practiced. $300 slipped from the pile into his jacket pocket. Then he'd turned and nearly jumped when he saw her. "What are you doing here?" he'd snapped. "Looking for the restocking forms." "Sorry, Mr. Butler." "Next time, knock." Marcus, the 15-year veteran server, had confronted Michael about the missing tips 2 weeks later. Alexis had been in the break room when she'd heard the raised voices in the office. "The math doesn't add up," Marcus had said firmly. "We should have had $1,800 in the pool last night. The slip says $1,500. "Are you accusing me of something, Marcus?" "I'm saying the numbers are wrong." Michael's voice had dropped to a deadly whisper. "Keep talking and you'll be gone by lunch. Are we clear?" When Marcus emerged, his face was ashen. Alexis had touched his arm gently. "Marcus, don't," he'd said quietly. "I have a family. I need this job. Just don't." But Alexis had already taken photos of the cash count sheets, had already documented the discrepancies, and in her private notebook, she'd written, "This wasn't management. This was extortion." The food poisoning incident had happened in Alexis's 10th month. A party of 6 had ordered the seafood special, Michael's idea, a new menu item featuring Chilean sea bass that Raymond had explicitly warned was past its prime. "The fish is going bad," Raymond had told Michael that morning. "We need to throw it out. That's $400 worth of product. We're serving it tonight. Mr. Butler, if someone gets sick, then we'll deal with it. Serve the fish." By 10 p.m., 3 of the 6 diners were violently ill. An ambulance had been called. The health department had been notified. And Michael had blamed Raymond entirely. "You're the chef. You're responsible for food safety. You're fired." Raymond, who'd worked at the Evergreen for 20 years, had left that night with 2 decades of loyalty rewarded with a cardboard box and a security escort. Alexis had photographed the spoiled fish before it had been served, had recorded Michael's order to serve it anyway, and when Raymond had walked past her on his way out, she'd whispered, "I'm so sorry. I promise this will be made right." He'd looked at her with tired, confused eyes, but said nothing. That night, her list had grown longer. Raymond Chun. 20 years of service. Fired for Michael's greed. Full reinstatement plus partnership in restructured kitchen operations. Michael's need for control bordered on pathological. He'd installed security cameras throughout the restaurant, not for safety, but to watch the staff. He'd review footage during his shifts, calling servers to his office to criticize how they'd handled a table, questioning their bathroom breaks, timing their conversations. He had his favorites, the servers who kept their heads down, who never questioned, who laughed at his jokes and called him sir with just the right amount of deference. They got the best shifts, the highest tipping sections, the occasional compliment. And then there were those he targeted. The ones who showed too much independence, too much competence, too much humanity. Alexis had been in the second category from her very first shift. He'd given her the worst sections, the difficult tables, the poor tippers, the customers who complained about everything. He'd scheduled her for double shifts on holidays. He'd assigned her tasks that were technically outside her role, deep cleaning the bathrooms, scrubbing the grease traps, hauling garbage in the snow. And Alexis had excelled at all of it. She'd turned the difficult tables into regulars who requested her section. She'd worked the double shifts without complaint and still outperformed everyone else. She'd cleaned the bathrooms until they sparkled and hauled the garbage with a smile. Every success had been a small rebellion. And Michael had felt it. By month 12, his hatred of her had become palpable. He'd watch her from the bar, his expression dark, his jaw clenched. When customers complimented her, his grip on his glass tightened. When other servers asked her advice, he'd interrupt and send them back to work. The moment he'd realized he couldn't break her was the moment he decided to destroy her instead. December 15th. Alexis's apartment. 11:47 p.m. Her phone had buzzed with a photo from Marcus. He'd taken it secretly in Michael's office, a staff schedule for Christmas Eve. Her name was circled in red ink. The text read, "Be careful. He's up to something." Alexis had stared at that circle, that angry red mark, and smiled. Because across town, Michael Butler sat in his home office, whiskey in hand, staring at that same schedule. He'd been planning this for weeks. Christmas Eve. The busiest night of the year. Maximum humiliation. Maximum audience. He'd find a reason, any reason, and he'd fire her in front of everyone. Show the whole staff what happened to people who thought they were better than their place. He circled her name one more time, pressing so hard the pen tore through the paper. "Time to get rid of her," he muttered to himself. What Michael Butler didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Alexis Brooks had been waiting for exactly this moment. That every abuse he'd committed had been documented. That every person he'd hurt had been catalogued. That the restaurant he thought he controlled had never really been his at all. He was planning her humiliation. She was planning his destruction. And in 9 days, on Christmas Eve, the whole world would learn the difference between a bully with temporary power and a woman who'd been born to lead. The countdown had begun. December 24th arrived with fresh snow and twinkling lights. The Evergreen Supper Club prepared for its busiest night of the year. Michael Butler prepared to fire his most competent server. And Alexis Brooks prepared to reclaim her empire. The stage was set. The moment was near. And neither of them would leave that restaurant the same person they'd walked in as. But before that night arrived, there was a journey to understand, one that had transformed a billionaire heiress into the perfect waitress. They say to truly understand someone, walk a mile in their shoes. Alexis Brooks walked 14 months in worn sneakers that pinched her toes. And she learned everything. The transformation from Alexis to Alex hadn't happened overnight. Those first weeks had been humbling in ways she'd never anticipated. Her hands, accustomed to signing contracts and shaking hands with CEOs, had blistered from scrubbing dishes when the dishwasher broke down. Her back, which had only ever ached after too many hours on international flights, now throbbed from hauling cases of wine from the basement storage. She'd learned the choreography of the dining room, how to weave between tables without bumping a single chair, how to carry 4 entrees balanced on one arm, how to read a customer's mood from 20 feet away. She discovered that remembering someone's name, their usual order, or asking about their daughter's college acceptance could turn a standard tip into a generous one. The physical toll had been brutal. Some nights, she'd limped back to her studio apartment and sat on the shower floor, letting hot water run over her aching muscles. But somewhere around month 4, her body had adapted. Her feet toughened. Her arms grew stronger. And she'd found an unexpected rhythm in the work. More surprisingly, she'd found meaning in it. Sophie Martinez had been the first person to truly see past Alexis's careful facade, or at least sense there was more beneath the surface. It was late October, nearly closing time, and they were both in the break room counting their tips. Sophie had 2 piles, one for rent, one for her daughter Emma's preschool tuition. She was 26, with tired eyes that occasionally sparkled when she talked about her little girl. "Emma asked me today if we could get a real Christmas tree this year," Sophie had said softly, counting her small pile of bills. "Not the fake one from the dollar store." "How old is she?" Alexis had asked. 4. "She doesn't understand why mommy's always working. Why we can't have the things her friends have." Sophie's voice had cracked. "I left her father 3 years ago. Started over with nothing. Some days I wonder if I made the right choice." Alexis had reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You did. You chose safety. You chose self-respect. You chose to show your daughter what strength looks like." Sophie had looked up, tears in her eyes. "You're different, Alex. You talk like someone who's been through things. Like you understand more than you should." Alexis had smiled carefully. "I just think every mother who fights for her kids is a hero. That's all." But Sophie had kept studying her with those knowing eyes. "Sometimes I think you're meant for something bigger than this place. Like you're just passing through." The observation had been too close to the truth, so Alexis had deflected. "Aren't we all passing through? Life's just a series of chapters." "Yeah," Sophie had agreed, but her expression suggested she didn't quite believe it. That night, Alexis had added to her private list, Sophie Martinez, rent assistance, education fund for Emma, Christmas bonus large enough for a real tree. Marcus Williams had the kind of weathered face that told stories without words. At 52, he'd been serving tables for over 3 decades, and he'd seen every type of manager imaginable. He'd taken one look at Alexis fumbling with the POS system her first week and had simply stepped in. "Let me show you the shortcuts," he'd said, his voice gravelly but kind. Over the following months, Marcus had become her unofficial mentor. He taught her how to handle drunk customers without causing a scene, how to upsell without being pushy, how to move through the dining room like water flowing around stones. "Butler's the worst we've had in my 15 years here," Marcus had confided one night during a slow Tuesday shift. "But he won't last forever. They never do. Eventually, someone higher up notices, and they disappear." "How do you survive it?" Alexis had asked. 15 years of different managers, different rules? "You remember why you're here. For me, it's my wife and my 2 daughters. One's in nursing school, the other's a senior in high school. This job pays for their dreams." He'd shrugged. "Butler can make my days miserable, but he can't touch what matters." The day Marcus had saved her from Michael's wrath had been in early summer. She'd accidentally brought the wrong wine to a table, a $200 bottle instead of the $75 one they'd ordered. Michael had been heading over to publicly eviscerate her when Marcus had intercepted. "My mistake, boss. I mixed up the order tickets." "Your mistake costs us $125, Marcus." "Then dock my pay. Won't happen again." Michael had sneered but walked away. Later, Alexis had found Marcus in the supply closet, massaging his temples. "You didn't have to do that. It was my error. Kid, we protect each other here. It's the only way we survive." He'd looked at her seriously. "This job tries to break you. Don't let it. You're better than this place." Alexis had wanted to tell him right then, "I own this place. And when the time comes, you're getting everything you deserve." Instead, she just said, "Thank you, Marcus. I won't forget this." If the dining room was a stage, the kitchen was its beating heart. And that heart belonged to Raymond Young. At 58, Raymond had worked at the Evergreen for 2 decades. He'd arrived as a line cook when the restaurant first opened and had worked his way up to head chef through pure talent and dedication. His food was art, every plate a composition of color, texture, and flavor that told a story. But Michael Butler had never appreciated art. He only appreciated profit margins. Alexis had witnessed their clashes from her first week. Michael demanding cheaper cuts of meat. Raymond insisting on quality. Michael forcing day-old seafood onto the menu. Raymond protesting the health risks. It always ended the same way. Raymond would comply because he needed the job, and a little piece of his dignity would crack away. His sous chef, Elena Martinez, was the opposite, young, fiery, full of dreams. She was 31 and constantly sketching in a battered notebook during breaks. "What are you drawing?" Alexis had asked one day. Elena had shown her detailed plans for a restaurant of her own. Casa Elena. Traditional Mexican cuisine with modern technique. "I've been saving for 6 years, but..." She'd closed the notebook with a sigh. "Banks won't give loans to people like me. No collateral. No connections." Alexis had studied those drawings. Beautiful, ambitious, achievable with the right backing. Another name for her list, Elena Martinez, business loan, culinary consulting, mentorship program. The kitchen staff had become a tight unit, protecting each other from Michael's tirades. When Raymond was blamed for the food poisoning incident that wasn't his fault, the entire kitchen had stood by him silently, knowing the truth but unable to risk their own jobs by speaking up. Alexis had watched it all, documenting everything, promising herself, "When this is over, every single one of you will be treated the way you deserve." Mrs. Eleanor Patterson had become Alexis's favorite challenge. The 79-year-old widow was sharp as a tack, wealthy beyond measure, and came in every Thursday evening precisely at 6:30 p.m. She always requested Alexis's section. "You carry yourself differently, dear," Mrs. Patterson had observed one evening, her blue eyes twinkling. Like someone who's been trained in etiquette but is deliberately hiding it. Alexis's heart had skipped. Just good customer service training, Mrs. Patterson. The older woman hadn't looked convinced. My late husband started as a dishwasher, you know. Built a manufacturing empire from nothing. But he never forgot where he came from. Said the best leaders are the ones who've worked every job in the building. The comment had been so pointed that Alexis had wondered if somehow Mrs. Patterson knew. But that was impossible. There was also the young couple, David and Sarah, whom Alexis had helped orchestrate a perfect proposal for. She'd coordinated with Raymond for a special dessert, arranged the corner table with candles, and made sure every detail was flawless. They'd cried, hugged her, and left a $200 tip that Michael had tried to confiscate for the tip pool. Gifts given directly to servers are theirs alone, Marcus had interjected, citing a labor law Michael couldn't argue with. And there was Mr. Chun, no relation to Raymond, a businessman who traveled constantly and always ordered the same thing. After 3 visits, Alexis had simply brought his coffee, black, 2 sugars, without asking. You remembered, he'd said, genuinely surprised. That's my job, Mr. Chun. To make you feel valued. He'd started leaving $100 tips every visit. And Michael's jealousy had intensified with each one. You're making the other servers look bad, Michael had hissed at her one night. I'm just doing my job well, she'd replied evenly. Do it less well. It was the most absurd thing he'd ever said to her. And the moment she'd known, he was threatened by competence itself. Month 11 had brought the closest call. A woman in her 40s, expensively dressed, had been seated in Alexis's section. From the first moment, she'd stared at Alexis with narrowed, calculating eyes. Excuse me, the woman had said as Alexis poured water. Have we met? You look incredibly familiar. I don't think so. I just have one of those faces. No, I'm sure I've seen you. Forbes. Were you in Forbes magazine? There was an article about young female CEOs and... The woman had trailed off, still studying Alexis's features. Alexis's hands had trembled slightly. I think you're mistaking me for someone else. Maybe. But the woman had pulled out her phone, clearly searching. Alexis had excused herself and immediately texted Margaret from the bathroom. Close call. Customer might recognize me. We need to move up the timeline. Margaret's response, stay calm. If exposed early, we pivot. But ideally, wait for the perfect moment. Be patient. When Alexis had returned to the table, the woman had looked up from her phone with a confused expression. You know what, I was wrong. The woman I was thinking of is older. And blonde. Sorry for being weird. Alexis had smiled with relief. No problem at all. But that night, she told Margaret, I can't risk much longer. If the wrong person recognizes me before I'm ready, it ruins the impact of everything I've built. Then let's be ready, Margaret had replied. When Butler makes his move, we strike. December 15th had arrived with the first real snow of the season. Alexis had come in for her shift to find a crowd around the break room bulletin board. The Christmas Eve schedule was posted. Alex. You lucky thing. Sophie had called out. You got prime section on Christmas Eve. Alexis had pushed through to see. There was her name, assigned to the main dining room, the busiest, most visible section on the restaurant's most profitable night. Marcus had appeared at her shoulder, his expression troubled. That's weird. What do you mean? Butler usually gives Christmas Eve prime to his favorites. People who kiss his ass. He'd paused delicately. Not one of those people. Sophie had laughed, oblivious. Maybe he finally recognizes talent. You'll make amazing tips, Alex. Emma and I are getting our tree the day after Christmas with my holiday pay. But Alexis had felt ice in her stomach. She'd looked across the room to where Michael stood at the bar, and when their eyes met, he'd raised his whiskey glass in a mock toast. His smile had been predatory. This wasn't recognition. This was a setup. Her phone had buzzed. "Margaret, he's planning something. Are you ready?" Alexis had stepped into the hallway to respond, more than ready. "It's time. Have everything prepared for December 24th. This ends on Christmas Eve. Margaret, security is on standby. Papers are ready. I'll be 15 minutes away. Just give me the signal. Alexis, you'll know the signal when you hear it." She'd returned to the break room, where Sophie was still excited about the schedule. "We should celebrate. Maybe grab coffee after our shift." "I'd love that," Alexis had said warmly. Because after Christmas Eve, Sophie would understand everything. They all would. 9 days until Christmas Eve. 9 days until Michael Butler learned that the waitress he'd been tormenting was the woman who could end him with a phone call. 9 days until Alexis Brooks stopped hiding. The game was almost over. And Michael Butler had no idea he'd already lost. The days between December 15th and December 24th passed like a held breath. Michael perfected his plan, savoring the anticipation of his Christmas Eve spectacle. Alexis finalized every detail with Margaret, ensuring nothing would go wrong. The staff worked their shifts, laughing and complaining and dreaming of their holiday plans, unaware that their lives were about to change. And somewhere in the careful choreography of it all, justice prepared to take center stage. The week before Christmas, the Evergreen Supper Club sparkled with lights and possibilities. But behind the festive facade, two people were preparing for war. Only one knew the battle was coming. The staff had noticed the change in Michael immediately. He'd always been volatile, but in the days after posting the Christmas Eve schedule, he'd become something else entirely, manic, almost giddy with anticipation. His eyes followed Alexis constantly, and his smile had taken on a predatory quality that made even his most loyal servers uncomfortable. "Something's off with Butler," Marcus had muttered to Alexis during a lunch shift. "He's acting like a kid on Christmas morning. And you're the present he's waiting to unwrap." Alexis had simply nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "I've noticed." That same afternoon, Derek Morrison, the assistant manager who'd learned to survive by staying quiet, had been summoned to Michael's office. Through the thin walls, Alexis had heard fragments of their conversation while restocking wine glasses nearby. Christmas Eve, prime section, maximum visibility. Michael's voice had been animated. "That's when we do it. Are you sure about this?" Derek's reluctance had been palpable even through the wall. "She's the best server we have. Customers love her." "That's exactly the problem." Michael's voice had turned sharp. "She's making me look bad. Making the whole operation look bad because everyone compares the rest of the staff to her. Plus, she's too confident. Too independent. Time to remind everyone who's in charge here." But on Christmas Eve? In front of everyone. That's the point. Maximum impact. I'll accuse her of skimming from the register, already set up the shortage. We'll count the drawer publicly, discover the theft, and I'll fire her in front of the whole restaurant. By the time anyone realizes it's fake, she'll be gone and no one will hire her after a theft accusation. There had been a long pause. Then Derek's quiet, defeated voice. "Okay. Whatever you say, boss." "That's what I like to hear. Now get back to work." Alexis had calmly finished stocking the glasses, her hand steady despite the fury building in her chest. So that was his plan. Frame her for theft, humiliate her publicly, destroy her reputation. She'd immediately texted Margaret, "He's planning to frame me for theft." Christmas Eve. Public accusation. Margaret's response had been swift. "Perfect. Let him dig his own grave. We'll bury him in it." December 19th, 10 a.m. A small cafe 3 miles from the Evergreen, where no one from the restaurant would recognize them. Margaret Chen sat at a corner table, an elegant leather briefcase beside her chair. Alexis slid into the seat across from her, still wearing her waitress uniform from the morning shift. The contrast between them was stark, Margaret in her $3,000 suit, Alexis in polyester and an apron. Margaret opened the briefcase. Everything you need. Ownership documentation, Michael Butler's termination papers, the complete evidence file, 318 pages of his misconduct. Security will be on standby. I can be there in 15 minutes from your call. Alexis had stared at the papers, the weight of the moment suddenly crushing. What if I'm making a mistake? What if I should just reveal myself quietly? Fire him through proper channels. You could do that. Margaret's voice had been gentle. But is that what your father wanted? He didn't just want you to understand the work. He wanted you to understand the workers. To see injustice firsthand and learn how to fight it. I know, but... Alexis. Margaret had leaned forward. Your father wanted you to bridge both worlds. The executive and the employee. What better way than showing everyone, publicly, undeniably, that justice can come from unexpected places. That the people they dismiss as just a waitress might be the ones holding all the power. Alexis had felt tears prick her eyes. These people have become my friends, Margaret. Sophie, Marcus, Raymond, they don't know what's about to happen. What if they feel betrayed? They'll understand. You didn't lie about caring for them. You didn't fake the work you did. You just didn't tell them everything about yourself. There's a difference. The decision had solidified then, crystalline and clear. Christmas Eve. When Michael makes his move, I make mine. Margaret had smiled. Your father would be proud. Despite Michael's oppressive presence, the staff had managed to maintain their Christmas spirit, or perhaps because of his oppression, they'd clung to it even harder. Sophie had brought in homemade cookies on December 20th, distributed them during the pre-shift meeting. Emma helped me make them, she'd announced proudly. They're a little lopsided, but they're made with love. Marcus had organized a secret gift exchange, passing around a hat for people to draw names. $5 limit, he'd instructed. It's not about the money. It's about showing we care. Raymond had been preparing special off-menu items for staff meals, his way of showing love when words failed him. Homemade tamales, fresh bread, a spectacular tres leches cake that had made Elena cry because it reminded her of her grandmother's recipe. Alexis had drawn Sophie's name and had carefully selected a gift that wouldn't reveal too much, a beautiful picture frame with "You Are Enough" engraved on it, and a $50 gift card to the toy store disguised as being from Santa's helper. When Sophie had opened it during their break, she'd hugged Alexis tight. This is too much, Alex. It's exactly enough, Alexis had replied, her throat tight with emotion. That night, alone in her apartment, she'd wrestled with guilt. These people are my friends now. Real friends. And tomorrow, their entire world changes, and they don't even know it. On December 21st, the hostess had approached Alexis with a message. Mrs. Patterson called. She's booked a table for 8 on Christmas Eve at 8 p.m. Specifically requested your section. 8 people? That's unusual for her. She said it's her 80th birthday. Big family celebration. The hostess had smiled. She also said, and I quote, "That young woman is special. I can always tell. She has the bearing of someone destined for great things." Alexis's heart had skipped. Mrs. Patterson had always been perceptive, but this felt like more than casual observation. Did she say anything else? Just that she's looking forward to seeing you. Alexis hadn't known it yet, but that reservation would become the catalyst for everything. While the staff celebrated their small joys, Michael had been perfecting his trap. On December 22nd, Alexis had watched through a gap in the supply closet door as Michael had deliberately removed $400 from the register and pocketed it. He'd then written on a sticky note, "Check Alex's till at end of Christmas Eve shift. Discrepancy expected." He'd been smiling the entire time, sipping his whiskey, clearly savoring the anticipation. Derek had walked in, seen what Michael was doing, and gone pale. "Michael, this isn't right. You're framing her." "I'm maintaining order," Michael had corrected coldly. "Watch and learn, Derek. This is how you control a staff. Fear and consequences. By the time I'm done with her, no one will ever question me again." Derek had left without another word, his shoulders slumped in defeat. That evening, Alexis had made a phone call she'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "Mom? It's me." Victoria Brooks's voice had been warm, cultured, concerned. "Darling. Tomorrow's the day, isn't it? How did you know?" "A mother always knows. Are you ready?" Alexis had felt the tears come then. 14 months of suppressed identity, of living a double life, of carrying the weight of what she knew was coming. "I'm terrified, Mom. What if I'm not strong enough? What if Dad was wrong about me?" "Your father would be proud," Victoria had said firmly. "Not of what you're about to do tomorrow, but of what you've already done. You didn't have to work those shifts. You didn't have to endure that man's cruelty. You didn't have to become friends with people you could have just managed from a distance. But you did. That's who you are. I just want to make him proud." "You already have, sweetheart. Tomorrow, you reclaim everything. But you'll do it as a better person than you were before." After hanging up, Alexis had pressed and hung her waitress uniform for the last time, treating it with the respect it deserved. But in her closet, hidden behind casual clothes, hung something else, a designer dress worth $15,000. Red, elegant, powerful, waiting for its moment. She touched the fabric, then pulled her hand away. "Not yet. Tomorrow, I walk in as Alex. I'll leave as Alexis." Michael had arrived at 6 a.m., 2 hours before anyone else. Alexis had seen him through the window as she'd approached for her shift, watching him at the register, making his final adjustments to the trap he'd set. When she'd walked in at 4:30 p.m. for the dinner shift, he'd been at the bar, unusually cheerful. "Big night tonight, Alex," he'd said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Hope you're ready." "Always ready, Mr. Butler." "We'll see about that." At exactly 5 p.m., the doors had opened. Snow had begun to fall outside, gentle and steady. Christmas music, Silent Night, had played softly through the speakers. Customers had streamed in, excited and festive, their faces bright with holiday joy. Alexis had tied her apron one last time, the motion now as natural as breathing. Across the room, Michael had watched her, his expression cold and anticipatory. In 6 hours, both their lives would change forever. But only one of them knew it. The Evergreen Supper Club had never looked more beautiful. Twinkling lights reflected off wine glasses. Laughter filled the air. Families gathered around tables, celebrating love and togetherness. But beneath the festive surface, two forces were about to collide. There's a moment in every person's life when everything hinges on a single decision. For Michael Butler, his moment came at 9:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve. He just didn't know it yet. 5 p.m., the shift begins. The Evergreen Supper Club had been transformed into a winter wonderland. Twinkling white lights wrapped around every pillar. Fresh garlands draped across the bar. A towering Christmas tree stood in the corner, its ornaments catching and reflecting the candlelight from every table. The air smelled of pine, cinnamon, and roasting meat. Alexis's section filled first, as it always did. Regulars had called ahead specifically requesting her. Mr. Chen arrived at 5:15 and smiled when Alexis brought his coffee, black, 2 sugars, without being asked. A young couple celebrating their first Christmas together. A family with 3 children whose eyes went wide at the decorations. Michael noticed. From his perch at the bar, nursing his first whiskey of the evening, his jaw clenched as he watched customer after customer light up when Alexis approached their table. She was in perfect form tonight. Warm but not over-familiar. Efficient but never rushed. She made every guest feel like they were the only table in the restaurant, the only people who mattered. A 4-year-old girl dropped her crayons, and Alexis knelt down to help her pick them up, complimenting her drawing. The parents' faces had softened with gratitude. This was what Michael hated most. Not that she was good at her job, but that she made it look effortless. Made him look like a tyrant by comparison. By 6:30, the restaurant had reached full capacity. Every table filled, a waiting list forming at the host stand. The kitchen was slammed, tickets printing faster than they could be filled, but Raymond commanded his crew with the precision of a conductor. Plates went out perfectly timed, beautifully composed, exactly as ordered. Sophie was working the bar section, and Alexis could see her struggling with a particularly difficult customer, a man in an expensive suit who kept changing his order, snapping his fingers for attention, complaining about wait times that were completely normal for Christmas Eve. Michael swooped in, but not to help. To perform. What seems to be the problem here? His voice was loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Sophie's face flushed. "Sir, I was just explaining that during our busiest night." "Excuses." Michael cut her off. "Sir, I apologize for the incompetence. Your next drink is on the house." The customer looked embarrassed. "Actually, she's been doing great. I was just being impatient. It's Christmas Eve, I understand you're busy." But Michael ignored him entirely, turning on Sophie. "This is unacceptable service. See me after your shift." Sophie's eyes filled with tears as Michael walked away, satisfied with his public display of authority. Alexis watched it all, her hand steady as she opened a bottle of wine for her own table. Mental note number 47 of the evening. Public humiliation of Sophie. December 24th, 6:34 p.m. Witnessed by table 12 and 14 and 16. At 7:45, the front door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and swirling snow. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson entered like visiting royalty, wrapped in an elegant wool coat, her white hair perfectly styled. Behind her came 7 family members, her children, grandchildren, and a great-granddaughter who couldn't have been more than 2 years old. The hostess led them to Alexis's prime section, the large corner table that had been specially set with the restaurant's finest linens and stemware. "Alex, dear." Mrs. Patterson's face lit up when she saw Alexis approaching. "I specifically requested you. This is my 80th birthday, and I wanted the best." Alexis felt genuine warmth flood her chest. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm honored. We're going to make this absolutely perfect." The family welcomed Alexis into their celebration immediately. Mrs. Patterson introduced everyone, her daughter Margaret, not the same Margaret as Alexis's attorney, her son Thomas, for grandchildren, and little Lily, the great-granddaughter who hid shyly behind her mother's legs. From the bar, Michael watched, his whiskey glass refilled for the 3rd time. His expression darkened with every smile Alexis drew from the Patterson family. As Alexis took their orders, Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter, a woman in her late 20s named Sarah, asked, "Have you always wanted to work in restaurants?" Alexis paused, choosing her words carefully. "I'm working here to understand something important. About value and worth. About what matters when everything else is stripped away." Mrs. Patterson's knowing eyes studied her. "You remind me of my late husband, Charles. He once worked 3 jobs to build his first business, washing cars, mowing lawns and bussing tables. When he finally became successful, he never forgot where he came from. Never forgot what it felt like to be invisible." "That's exactly it," Alexis said softly. "Being invisible. Understanding what that means changes you." The conversation deepened from there, philosophy, purpose, legacy. Other customers at nearby tables had stopped their own conversations to listen. This wasn't just service anymore. It was something deeper. Human connection in its purest form. Michael's face darkened with every passing minute. His knuckles whitened around his glass. At exactly 9 o'clock, the kitchen doors swung open, and Raymond himself emerged carrying a cake that hadn't been on any menu. 3 tiers, decorated with elegant white frosting and fresh berries, candles blazing. Elena followed with champagne flutes for the entire table. The restaurant fell silent. Then someone started singing Happy Birthday, and within seconds, the entire dining room had joined in, staff, customers, even the line cooks visible through the kitchen window. Mrs. Patterson wept openly, her hand pressed to her chest. When the song ended, she stood, her voice clear and strong despite her emotion. "I want to thank this remarkable young woman, Alex, for making tonight magical. In a world that's forgotten kindness, she's a reminder that it still exists. That people still matter." The restaurant erupted in applause. Other servers smiled and nodded. They knew Alexis deserved the recognition. Even Marcus had tears in his eyes. At the bar, Michael's knuckles were white around his whiskey glass. When the Patterson family prepared to leave, they gathered at the edge of the table, pooling cash. Thomas, Mrs. Patterson's son, counted it out loud so everyone could hear. $200. For the best service we've ever had anywhere. He handed it directly to Alexis. The entire restaurant watched. More applause rippled through the room. Even the difficult customer from Sophie's section was clapping. Alexis held the cash, overwhelmed. "This is too generous." "It's exactly what you deserve," Mrs. Patterson said, hugging her tight. "Remember what I said, dear. You're meant for something bigger than this place." As the family left, calling out Merry Christmas to the whole restaurant, Alexis stood there holding the money, her eyes bright. And Michael Butler snapped. Michael slammed his whiskey glass down on the bar. The sound cut through the restaurant like a gunshot. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The Christmas music seemed to fade. He stood, his movements deliberate and heavy as he stormed across the floor. Each footstep echoed. Guests turned to watch, confusion and concern spreading across their faces. Alexis stood perfectly still, the cash still in her hand, her expression calm. She knew what was coming. Had known it would come. This was the moment. At the bar section, Marcus grabbed Sophie's arm. "Oh no. Not tonight. Please not tonight. What the hell do you think you're doing?" Michael's voice was loud, sharp, cutting. Alexis looked at him calmly. "I was just..." He snatched the money from her hand. "You were showboating. Making a scene. Making this about you instead of the restaurant. This goes in the tip pool. You don't get special treatment just because you smile pretty." Mrs. Patterson's daughter, still near the door, turned back. "Excuse me, that money was for her specifically." Michael didn't even glance at her. "Ma'am, this is how we run things here. Company policy." Gasps rippled through the restaurant. A child's voice rang out clearly, "Mommy, why is that mean man yelling at the nice lady?" Michael turned back to Alexis, his voice dropping into something cruel, something he'd been saving. "You know what? I'm tired of your act. You think you're special? You're not." He reached out and ripped the apron from her waist, the tie snapping. "You're just another waitress. Easily replaced. Disposable." The words hung in the air like poison. "You're fired. Get out. Merry Christmas." Complete silence. Even the Christmas music seemed to have stopped, though it was still playing. A fork clattered onto a plate somewhere in the back. 150 pairs of eyes were locked on them. Alexis stood perfectly still. No tears. No trembling. No shock. Just absolute, perfect calm. She looked at Michael Butler, really looked at him. Into him. And she smiled. A small, knowing smile that made him shift uncomfortably. Then she spoke. For words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. You just made a mistake. Michael laughed, but it sounded hollow in the silent restaurant. Oh really? And what are you going to do about it, sweetheart? Sue me? Good luck. Alexis reached into her pocket slowly, deliberately. She pulled out her phone. The restaurant was so quiet that everyone could hear it unlock with a soft chime. She dialed. Held the phone to her ear. 1 ring. 2 rings. Then a voice, professional and clear, audible in the suffocating silence. Ms. Brooks. Is it time? Michael's laugh died in his throat. His face went from smug satisfaction to confusion. Yes, Margaret, Alexis said, her voice steady and strong. It's time. In that moment, everything Michael Butler thought he knew about the world, about power, about control, about who mattered and who didn't, was about to shatter like crystal on stone. The restaurant held its breath. Michael's confusion was shifting rapidly into something else, fear beginning to creep around the edges of his awareness. Who was Margaret? Why had she called this waitress Ms. Brooks? And why did Alexis suddenly look like someone else entirely, not a defeated employee, but a woman who'd been waiting for exactly this moment? There are moments in life that divide time into before and after. For everyone in the Evergreen Supper Club that night, 9:48 p.m. was one of those moments. Yes, Margaret, Alexis said, her voice steady and clear in the suffocating silence. It's time. Michael's confusion was shifting rapidly into irritation. Who the hell are you calling? Put that phone away and get out of my restaurant. Alexis looked at him with an expression he'd never seen before, not fear, not submission, but something that looked almost like pity. She tapped the speaker button. Margaret Chen's voice filled the restaurant, crisp and authoritative. Ms. Brooks, I have the paperwork ready. Shall I proceed? Ms. Brooks. The words hung in the air like smoke. Michael's face flickered with confusion. What is this? Some kind of prank. Alexis never broke eye contact with him. Her voice was no longer the deferential tone of a server. It was commanding, executive, final. Margaret, please inform Mr. Butler that as of this moment, I'm exercising my authority as primary shareholder and CEO of Brooks Global Investments. Michael's face went through a transformation, confusion melting into dawning realization, then hardening into disbelief, then cracking into horror. Effective immediately, I'm assuming direct control of all subsidiary operations, including the Evergreen Supper Club and Company. Gasps rippled through the restaurant like a wave. Someone whispered, "Did she say Brooks?" Another voice, louder, "Wait, that Brooks? The Billionaire family." Phones were already coming out. Frantic typing. Googling. Margaret's voice continued, professional and utterly devastating. Understood, Ms. Brooks. I'll have the documentation couriered within the hour. Mr. Butler's employment is hereby terminated, effective immediately. Michael staggered backward, grabbing the bar for support. Security has been notified and will arrive within 15 minutes. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. All evidence of financial impropriety, labor violations, and fraud has been compiled and will be forwarded to relevant authorities as necessary. Each sentence landed like a physical blow. Michael's expensive suit suddenly looked too big for him, like he was shrinking inside it. Alexis ended the call with a decisive tap. The restaurant watched in stunned silence as she removed her waitress vest, the polyester uniform she'd worn for 14 months, revealing an elegant silk blouse beneath. She unpinned her name tag, Alex, and held it for a moment before setting it on the nearest table like a discarded costume piece. Her entire demeanor shifted. Her posture straightened, shoulders back. Her voice, when she spoke, had lost every trace of the deferential server and became something else entirely, confident, powerful, undeniable. My name is Alexis Victoria Brooks, daughter of James Brooks, founder of Brooks Empire. And as of 60 seconds ago, Mr. Butler, your former employer. The restaurant exploded. Phones were everywhere now, cameras flashing. People were frantically searching, gasping at what they found. "Oh my God, look at this Forbes article, missing heiress Alexis Brooks. Where is she now? There's a photo of her at a charity gala. That's her. She's worth $4.7 billion. She's been working here as a waitress." News articles appeared on screens throughout the restaurant. Side-by-side photos, Alexis in a designer gown at a Manhattan fundraiser next to Alexis in her waitress uniform. The same face. The same person. Someone shouted, "This is insane." Another, "I can't believe this is real." Michael just stood there, his face the color of old newspaper. This is insane," he finally managed, his voice strangled. "You can't, this isn't." His face was cycling through emotion so rapidly it was almost painful to watch. Disbelief, anger, fear, panic, back to disbelief. Alexis looked at him with ice-cold composure. "I can. And I did. But you're just you were. I was learning, Mr. Butler. Learning exactly what kind of man you are. And now everyone else knows too." Sophie appeared at Alexis's side, tears streaming down her face. "Alex. You're really—" "I'm still your friend, Sophie," Alexis said gently, taking her hand. "That part was always real." Marcus stepped forward, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. "I'll be damned. I knew there was something different about you. 15 years I've been here and I knew." Raymond emerged from the kitchen, his white chef's coat still pristine, wiping his hands on a towel. The entire kitchen staff followed him, crowding in the doorway. Elena's hand was over her mouth in shock. Derek, the assistant manager, was backing away slowly toward the office, his face pale. He knew his complicity in Michael's schemes was about to come to light. Alexis turned away from Michael to face her co-workers, her friends. Her voice softened, losing the ice it had held when speaking to Michael. "Everyone who's been mistreated by this man, and I know that's most of you, you're getting back pay for every stolen tip." Gasps. Tears. Sophie's knees buckled, and Marcus caught her. "Bonuses for every injustice you suffered in silence." Raymond's stoic facade cracked, tears running down his face. "And a formal apology from the new management. Which is me." Sophie collapsed into a chair, sobbing with relief. Other staff members were hugging each other, crying, laughing, unable to process what they were hearing. Alexis pulled out a leather folder from behind the bar. Margaret had placed it there earlier that day. She opened it, revealing pages of documentation. Maria Rodriguez, fired 11 months ago for attending her son's school play. Full back pay plus a $50,000 settlement. A server gasped. "Maria? You're going to find Maria." "I already have." Marcus Williams, tips systematically stolen over 3 years. $23,000 in restitution plus 20% interest. Marcus grabbed the bar, his whole body shaking. Raymond Chun, 20 years of loyalty repaid with abuse and blame. Full partnership in the newly restructured kitchen operations. 20% ownership. Raymond's towel fell from his hands. Elena caught him as his knees gave out. She continued down the list. Every name. Every injustice. Every person Michael had hurt. She documented everything. Michael finally found his voice, desperate and aggressive. "You can't do this. I have a contract. I have rights." Alexis pulled out another document. "You mean the contract that includes a termination for cause clause?" She read from it, theft, harassment, safety violations, fraud, any of which constitute grounds for immediate dismissal without severance. "I have 14 months of evidence. Photographs of you stealing from the register. Recordings of your verbal abuse. Witness statements from 12 current and former employees. Documentation of health code violations you deliberately ignored. Michael's face was chalk white. You're not just fired, Mr. Butler. You're done. Mrs. Patterson, who'd been standing near the door with her family, walked forward slowly. Tears streamed down her face. She took both of Alexis's hands in hers. My late husband always said, "Character is who you are when no one's watching. You, my dear, are remarkable." She tried to press the $200 back into Alexis's hands. Alexis smiled and gently pushed it back. "Keep it, Mrs. Patterson. Donate it to a charity that helps workers who've been exploited. They deserve it more than I do." The restaurant erupted in applause. People stood, cheering. Some were crying. The young couple Alexis had served earlier was filming everything on their phone. Michael, cornered and desperate, tried one last time. "This is a setup. She's lying. Someone call the police. This is..." The restaurant doors opened, bringing in a gust of cold air and snow. Two security officers in dark professional suits entered. One spoke calmly, "Mr. Butler? We need you to come with us." Behind them, Margaret Chin entered. She was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, carrying a leather briefcase. She looked exactly like what she was, a top-tier corporate attorney. She nodded to Alexis. "Ms. Brooks." "Margaret. Thank you for coming." Margaret approached Michael and handed him a sealed envelope. "Your termination letter. Final paycheck, minus restitution owed. And a cease and desist order." Michael stared at the envelope like it might bite him. "If you speak publicly about Ms. Brooks or this company, if you make any defamatory statements, if you attempt to contact any current or former employees, we will release the complete evidence file to law enforcement and the media. Do you understand?" Michael looked at the envelope, then at Alexis. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw something other than arrogance in his eyes. Not anger. Not defiance. Fear. Pure, absolute, primal fear. The security officers took his arms gently but firmly. As they walked him toward the door, past the staff he tormented, past the customers who'd witnessed his cruelty, Alexis called out, "Mr. Butler." He turned, his face showing a flicker of desperate hope. Maybe mercy. Maybe a reprieve. Alexis smiled. "Merry Christmas." The doors closed behind him with a soft click. And Michael Butler's kingdom, built on cruelty, maintained through fear, sustained by abuse, collapsed in 60 seconds. Through the window, the restaurant watched him stand alone in the falling snow, a security officer on each side, his expensive suit dusted white, his face hollow. Inside, the restaurant erupted once more, but this time with joy. For several long moments, nobody moved. The reality of what had just happened was too big to process. Then Sophie laughed, a high, slightly hysterical sound that broke the spell. Marcus started clapping. Raymond joined in. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was applauding again, this time not for a birthday, but for justice. And Alexis Brooks stood in the center of it all, no longer hiding, finally herself, and ready to transform everything. In the moments after a revolution, there's always silence. Then there's the reckoning. The security officers escorted Michael through the restaurant, past tables of customers who watched in stunned silence, past staff members who couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. The door opened, letting in a blast of cold air and swirling snow, and then closed behind him with a decisive click. Through the windows, everyone watched as Michael Butler stood alone on the sidewalk. Snow fell steadily, coating his expensive suit, settling in his dark hair. He'd been drinking all evening, no car, he'd taken an Uber to work. Now he fumbled with his phone, trying to call someone, anyone. His hands shook visibly even from inside. Inside the Evergreen Supper Club, the restaurant remained frozen in collective shock. 150 people trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Margaret Chun approached Alexis with professional composure. They shook hands, a formal gesture that somehow broke the spell. Alexis turned to face the dining room, and conversations died away as people waited to hear what she'd say. "Ladies and gentlemen." Her voice carried authority now, no trace of the deferential server. "I apologize for the disruption to your evening. That was not the Christmas Eve experience you came here for." Someone called out, "Are you kidding? That was incredible." Alexis smiled. "Your meals tonight are complimentary, with my sincere thanks for your understanding and patience." The restaurant erupted. Applause, cheers. Someone actually started chanting, "Alexis! Alexis!" until others joined in. She felt her cheeks flush. This part was harder than the confrontation had been. Being celebrated. Being seen. She held up her hands, laughing despite herself. "Please, enjoy your evening. Merry Christmas to all of you." Sophie approached tentatively, her mascara running from tears. Alexis? You lived in that tiny apartment. I saw it when I dropped you off that night after your double shift. The radiator that didn't work. Alexis took both her hands. "I did live there, Sophie. For 14 months. It was real. This part, the waitressing, our friendship, the conversations about Emma, that was all real." Sophie's face crumpled. "But why? Why would you do that?" "My father's will. He wanted me to understand what it meant to work for someone who doesn't know your name. To understand value and worth from the other side." Alexis squeezed her hands. "You helped me understand that, Sophie. You showed me what real strength looks like." They hugged then, both crying, and Marcus appeared beside them with his weathered face creased in a grin. "So all those times I gave you advice about dealing with management," he said. Alexis laughed through her tears. "Were incredibly helpful, actually. I'm serious, Marcus. You taught me more about leadership than any business school ever could." "Well, I'll be damned." He shook his head. 15 years and I finally got a manager worth a damn. Even if she was pretending not to be one. Raymond emerged from the kitchen, still in his chef's whites, moving with the quiet dignity he'd maintained through 20 years of service. He stood before Alexis, his weathered hands folded. "Ms. Brooks, if I may speak plainly." "Always, Raymond. Please." "Your father. I met him once. Years ago, maybe 15 years, when he first acquired this place through the investment firm." Alexis's eyes widened. "You knew him?" "He came in incognito, dressed like a regular customer. But I recognized him from a newspaper photo. He came back to the kitchen, shook my hand, and told me, 'I invest in places that have heart. You keep that heart alive.' I promised him I would." Raymond's voice cracked slightly. "I tried. But when Butler came, it got harder and harder to keep that promise." Alexis felt tears threatening again. "You did more than try, Raymond. You protected these people when you could. You kept the kitchen running with integrity even when Michael was cutting corners everywhere else. That's why you're getting that partnership. You've earned it 1,000 times over." Raymond bowed his head slightly, overcome. "Thank you, Ms. Brooks. Your father would be proud." As the initial shock wore off, customers began approaching Alexis. A businessman in his 50s extended his business card. "I own 3 restaurants in the city. What you just did. That's how you build real loyalty. Real respect. If you ever want to talk shop, call me." A young woman with a press badge clipped to her purse stepped forward eagerly. "I'm Sarah Chun with the Boston Globe. Would you be willing to tell this story? I think people need to hear it." Alexis considered. "Let me think about it. Tonight isn't about publicity. It's about justice. But, Maybe there's value in people knowing that this kind of thing still happens, and that it doesn't have to be tolerated. Mrs. Patterson, preparing to leave with her family, took Alexis's face in both hands. Your father raised you right, dear. What a birthday gift this has been, seeing real justice served. Happy birthday to me, indeed. Derek Morrison, who'd been hiding in the shadows near the office, finally approached. His face was pale, his hands shaking. Ms. Brooks, I need to explain. I knew what Michael was doing, and I didn't stop it. I was complicit, and Alexis held up a hand. You were complicit. You're right. But I also heard you try to stop him tonight. Try to talk him out of his plan. Derek looked shocked that she knew. Here's your choice, Derek. You can leave now with a neutral reference. I'll say you were adequate at your job and leave it at that. Or you can stay, help me rebuild this place the right way, and earn your redemption. You'd give me a chance? After everything. One chance. That's all anyone gets. Don't waste it. Derek nodded, his relief palpable. I won't. I swear I won't. All around the restaurant, guests were posting videos and photos in real time. Alexis's phone was vibrating constantly with notifications. Hashtags were already trending. Hashtag Christmas Karma. Hashtag Billionaire Waitress. Hashtag Evergreen Justice. Margaret handled the reporters' gathering outside with practiced ease. No official comments tonight. Ms. Brooks will release a statement tomorrow. Please respect her privacy and allow the restaurant to close in peace. Alexis scrolled through her messages. Friends from her previous life, shocked and excited. Board members requesting emergency meetings. Media outlets begging for interviews. And one text from her mother, your father is smiling down. So proud. Call me when you can. I love you. When the last customer finally left, Alexis started wiping down tables. The staff stared at her. Ms. Brooks, you don't have to, Sophie began. Yes, I do. I started this shift as a waitress. I'll end it as one. So they cleaned together, Alexis, Sophie, Marcus, Raymond, Elena, and the others. Wiping tables, stacking chairs, sweeping floors. The mundane and beautiful ritual of closing a restaurant. Will you come back? Sophie asked quietly. Even just to visit? Alexis smiled. Sophie, this place is mine now. I'll be here a lot more than you think. In fact, you're all going to get sick of seeing me. After everyone else had left, Alexis walked alone through the empty dining room. She touched the table she'd served, stood in the spot where Michael had fired her, sat at the bar where he'd watched her with such hatred all those months. Margaret entered quietly. Ready to go? 1 minute. Alexis removed her name tag one final time, Alex, and placed it gently behind the bar. A memorial to the woman she'd been for 14 months. A woman she'd never fully stopped being. Thank you for teaching me, she whispered to the empty restaurant. As they walked to the door, Margaret updated her. The board wants an emergency meeting. The press is relentless. Your calendar's exploding with requests. Tomorrow, Alexis said firmly. Tonight, I need to process what just happened. They paused at the door. Alexis looked back at the dark restaurant, snow falling past the windows, Christmas lights still twinkling. Everything changes tomorrow, she said softly. Margaret smiled. You changed everything tonight. Across town, in a modern apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, Michael Butler sat in darkness. His phone screen illuminated his face, 247 missed calls, hundreds of texts. Friends asking what happened. Colleagues distancing themselves. Former allies suddenly having no memory of ever supporting him. He pulled up Alexis's Forbes profile on his laptop with shaking hands. The article from 2 years ago, Billionaire heiress Alexis Brooks disappears. Where is she now? The photo showed her in an evening gown at a Manhattan charity gala, radiant, powerful, confident. He compared it to his memory of her in the waitress uniform, head down, saying, "Yes, Mr. Butler." The same person. How had he not seen it? A text came through from Derek. "Dude, what did you do? She offered me my job back, but she fired you. This is all over social media. You're trending for all the wrong reasons." Michael didn't respond. Couldn't respond. He just stared at the screen, at the woman he'd thought he could break, at the empire he'd never known she commanded. Tomorrow, the world would know his name. But not as a successful manager. Not as a businessman. As a cautionary tale about what happens when you underestimate the people you think don't matter. As the man who tried to humiliate a billionaire and lost everything in 60 seconds. Christmas Day would dawn on a different world. Christmas morning. The world woke up to a story that would become legend. Some people got presents under their trees. Michael Butler got a reckoning. By 6 a.m., the story had exploded across every platform. News anchors interrupted regular programming with breaking headlines. Billionaire heiress works undercover as waitress, exposes corrupt manager. The Christmas firing that shocked the world. Hashtag Christmas karma, when the waitress owned the company. Video clips from customers' phones had gone viral overnight. The moment Alexis revealed her identity. Michael's face draining of color. The staff's tears of relief. By 8 a.m., the combined videos had over 10 million views and climbing. Michael woke to the buzzing of his phone. 247 missed calls. His email inbox had exploded overnight. 400+ messages. His hands shook as he scrolled through them. From former friends, "Is this true? Call me ASAP." From enemies who'd always resented him, "Got exactly what you deserved." From former employees, "Karma is real. Merry Christmas, asshole." His landlord saw the news. "We need to talk about your lease and the building's reputation." The woman he'd been dating, "Don't ever contact me again." And worst of all, his mother, "What have you done, Michael? How could you treat people this way?" He sat on his couch in yesterday's clothes, staring at the phone, unable to process the magnitude of what was happening. At 9 a.m., his lawyer called. Michael answered on the first ring, desperate. "Tell me this can be fixed." "Michael, I need you to listen carefully. Brooks Global sent over their evidence file last night. And it's 318 pages. Documents, photographs, audio recordings, witness statements. They have you on theft, fraud, harassment, multiple labor violations, and health code infractions you deliberately ignored." Michael's stomach dropped. "Can we fight it?" His lawyer laughed bitterly. "Fight it? Michael, they could press criminal charges. The only reason they haven't is because they want this over quickly. My advice, sign whatever they offer and pray they show mercy." Michael pulled up his LinkedIn. Profile views had skyrocketed to over 10,000, but not for the reasons anyone would want. Messages from former colleagues were pouring in, and none were supportive. The Restaurant Owners Association had already removed his membership. His certification from a hospitality management group now showed, "Under review pending investigation." Out of desperation, he'd submitted 47 job applications overnight to restaurants across 3 states. By noon, he'd received exactly one response. "After reviewing recent events and conducting a background check, we've decided to move forward with other candidates. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." The others didn't even bother to respond. Against his better judgment, Michael checked social media. His name was trending worldwide. Not just in the US, globally. The memes were everywhere. His photo from the restaurant's website had been turned into a viral template. When you fire someone and they own the company. POV, you just made the worst mistake of your life. Congratulations, you played yourself. Twitter threads dissected every detail of his management style. Former employees were coming forward with their own stories of his abuse. The pile-on was relentless and growing by the hour. He made the fatal mistake of trying to defend himself. "This is a setup. I'm the victim here." She manipulated everyone by lying about her identity. The internet's response was immediate and brutal. "Dude, you literally stole tips from your staff. You fired someone on Christmas Eve for being good at their job. Take the L and disappear." Within 10 minutes, his tweet had 3 retweets and 847 quote tweets ripping him apart. He deleted it, but screenshots were already everywhere. Alexis woke in her penthouse apartment, the real one, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-covered city. Her mother, Victoria Brooks, was already in the kitchen making coffee, still elegant in a silk robe. "Merry Christmas, darling." Victoria handed her a cup. "You're all over the news. Every channel." They embraced, Alexis finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion and emotion of the past 14 months. "Your father would have loved this," Victoria said softly. "Not the confrontation, he hated conflict. But the lesson. The perfect teaching moment. You understanding both worlds." "I miss him, Mom." "I know, sweetheart. But he's here. In what you did. In who you've become." At 10 a.m. sharp, Alexis sat in her home office for the emergency board meeting. 12 faces appeared on her screen, the board of Brooks Global Investments. Chairman Robert Hayes spoke first. "Ms. Brooks, this is unprecedented. But I must say, the market response has been extraordinary." CFO Jennifer Martinez nodded enthusiastically. "Our stock is up 12% this morning. The story is resonating with consumers in ways we couldn't have predicted. This is brilliant PR." A skeptical board member, Richard Sterling, frowned. "It's also impulsive. Firing a manager without consulting the board." "I didn't fire an employee," Alexis interrupted calmly. "I terminated someone for documented criminal behavior. That's within my authority as CEO. But I take your point. Which is why I want to present a comprehensive plan moving forward." Alexis shared her screen, revealing a detailed presentation, Operation Evergreen. This wasn't just about one bad manager. It's about systemic problems in how we operate. "I'm proposing we transform all Brooks Empire properties with new standards: living wages, profit sharing, employee representation on advisory boards, and regular undercover assessments by executives." Sterling objected. "This will hurt profits significantly." "Short-term, possibly. Long-term? Loyalty is more profitable than fear. Low turnover, high morale, genuine customer service. These create value that far exceeds the cost of fair wages." Chairman Hayes smiled. "All in favor?" The vote was unanimous. Even Sterling raised his hand, recognizing the writing on the wall. At 2 p.m., Alexis stood at a podium in Brooks Empire headquarters, transformed back into the billionaire heiress the world had known before. Designer suit, perfect hair, professional makeup. But she'd brought props. Her waitress uniform and name tag sat on a table beside her. 50 media outlets, cameras everywhere, questions shouted before she even began. She held up a hand for silence. 2 years ago, my father passed away and left me a challenge. He said if I wanted to lead this empire, I needed to understand it from the ground up. So I disappeared. I became Alex the waitress. And I learned everything I needed to know. She paused, letting that sink in. I learned that frontline workers are the heart of any business. I learned that toxic management doesn't just destroy morale, it destroys value. And I learned that the most powerful thing any leader can do is listen. "Ms. Brooks," a reporter shouted, "do you regret firing Michael Butler on Christmas Eve?" "I don't regret holding someone accountable for documented abuse and theft. I regret that it took 14 months for him to face consequences. That's the real failure, not his firing, but how long he was allowed to operate. Sophie, Marcus, and Raymond joined her on stage, nervous but determined. Sophie spoke first, her voice shaking but strong. Alexis gave me hope when I had none. She showed me that justice still exists. Marcus added, 20 years in hospitality. Never seen anyone who cared like she does. She didn't just fire a bad boss. She changed our lives. Raymond, dignified as always, she was rich and powerful. She could have watched from a distance. Instead, she chose to walk with us. That's real leadership. The media ate it up. This wasn't just a story, it was a movement. Watching the press conference from his apartment, Michael couldn't help himself. He posted again. Easy to play hero when you're a billionaire in disguise. I'm the victim of a setup. The response was instant and devastating. Within minutes, he was ratioed so badly he couldn't even read all the replies. He deleted the post, but it was too late. Screenshots. Forever. At 5 p.m., Michael's lawyer called with the settlement offer. Brooks Global will drop criminal charges if you sign an NDA and agree never to work in hospitality again. That's my entire career. Michael, if they press charges, you could face jail time. Sign the papers or risk everything. Michael's hand shook as he signed. His career ended with his signature on a legal document, on Christmas Day, alone in his apartment. Back home, Alexis changed into comfortable clothes. Margaret visited with final updates. It's done. Butler signed. He's gone. Alexis didn't feel triumphant. Just tired. Did I do the right thing? You did what your father hoped. You became a leader who understands both worlds. As Margaret left, an email arrived from an anonymous address. Subject: Thank you. I worked at Evergreen 3 years ago. Butler fired me when I got pregnant. I've been struggling ever since. When I saw what you did, I cried. Not for me. For everyone he hurt. Thank you for proving that sometimes, the good guys win. Maria R. Alexis read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face. She saved it in a folder, Why This Mattered. Looking out at the snow-covered city, she whispered, one victory down. An empire to transform. The real work starts tomorrow. Now, the reckoning was complete. Michael Butler's fall from grace was total and irreversible. But for Alexis Brooks and the staff of the Evergreen Supper Club, this was just the beginning. The real transformation, the lasting legacy, would be built in the months to come. 3 months later, the world had moved on to the next viral story. But at the Evergreen Supper Club, the revolution was just beginning. The restaurant had closed for renovations in January. Workers had stripped it down to the studs and rebuilt it from the inside out. The reopening was scheduled for 6 p.m. on a Friday, and the line stretched around the block. The physical changes were stunning. Updated decor, a state-of-the-art kitchen, comfortable staff break rooms with real furniture instead of folding chairs. But the real transformation ran much deeper than paint and equipment. Alexis stood at the entrance, watching her staff prepare for the first service. They moved with a confidence that hadn't existed before. No one was looking over their shoulder, waiting for Michael's next criticism. Because Michael was gone. And everything had changed. Alexis had implemented everything she'd promised that Christmas Eve, and more. Living wages. All staff now made 40% above industry standard. Health benefits with full coverage for employees and families. An education fund providing $5,000 annually for anyone pursuing further learning. Profit sharing, with 20% of quarterly net profits distributed among the team. And perhaps most importantly, an employee council with real decision-making power. Staff representatives who could challenge management, suggest changes, and vote on major decisions. Sophie had been the first to point out what this meant. We're not just workers anymore. We're partners. Sophie was now assistant manager, enrolled in business school through the education program. Her daughter Emma was thriving, no longer worried about whether they'd have enough for rent. A year ago, I was one bad day away from homeless, Sophie told Alexis during a quiet moment before opening. Now I'm planning my future. Our future. That's because of you. Marcus had become head of staff training, developing a comprehensive program for new servers. But more than teaching how to balance trays, he taught dignity, respect, and self-advocacy. He'd written the employee handbook himself. Section 1 read, "You are not disposable. You are valuable. And this company will prove it every single day." Raymond was now executive chef and 10% owner. He'd redesigned the entire menu, upscale but accessible, with ingredients sourced ethically from farmers paid fairly. Michelin reviewers had started visiting in February. A star was within reach. Derek had stayed and kept his promise. 3 months of proving himself, standing up to difficult customers, protecting staff, always choosing integrity over shortcuts. Finally, Marcus had shaken his hand. "You're good now. Welcome to the family." Derek had nearly cried. "I won't forget this chance." And then there was Maria Rodriguez. Alexis had tracked her down personally, found her working 2 minimum wage jobs, still struggling. "I'm offering you your job back. With 3 years of back pay and a $50,000 settlement." Maria had stared at her in disbelief. "You remembered me?" "I remembered everyone, Maria. Every single person he hurt." Now Maria worked alongside Sophie. Her sons did homework in the break room after school. The staff had adopted them as family. The changes weren't limited to one restaurant. Every Brooks Empire property, hotels, restaurants, retail locations across the country, implemented the evergreen model. The board's initial skepticism had evaporated when the numbers came in. Employee retention up 87%. Customer satisfaction up 62%. Revenue up 34%. Treating people well wasn't just ethical. It was profitable. Other companies began copying the model. The Restaurant Owners Association invited Alexis to keynote their annual conference. She spoke about her experience to a crowd of 2,000 industry professionals. Standing ovation. Dozens of restaurants pledged to adopt similar policies. A movement was born, #Empire Standard. No one knew where Michael Butler was anymore. Rumors suggested he'd moved out of state, changed careers. One unconfirmed sighting placed him working retail somewhere in the Midwest, keeping his head down. His social media was deleted. His LinkedIn gone. He'd become a cautionary tale taught in management schools. The case study was titled, "The Cost of Toxic Leadership, the Butler Incident." Alexis felt no satisfaction in his downfall. Only a quiet certainty that justice had been served. She split her time between boardrooms and restaurants now. Once a month, she worked a shift at a different Brooks property, sometimes announced, sometimes undercover. The staff never knew when she might show up. The awards came, Time magazine's 100 Most Influential People. Forbes' Youngest CEO of the Year. Humanitarian awards for labor reform. But her favorite hung in her office above all the others, a certificate from the Evergreen staff voting her boss of the year. That one mattered most. In June, Sophie got married. Alexis stood beside her as maid of honor, the entire Evergreen staff in attendance. They closed the restaurant for a private reception that Raymond catered personally. During her vows, Sophie turned to Alexis in the front row. To Alexis, who taught me that I was never just a waitress. I was always enough. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. On a quiet summer evening, Alexis visited her father's grave. She sat beside James Brooks's headstone and told him everything. "You were right, Dad. I had no idea what leadership meant until I learned to follow. But I want you to know, I'm not just running your empire. I'm evolving it. She placed her old name tag, Alex, on the grave. Thank you for the challenge. Thank you for believing I could grow. A documentary filmmaker approached her. She agreed with one condition: the staff got final approval. 6 months of filming resulted in the Waitress who owned the company. It premiered at Sundance. Won Best Documentary. Streamed on Netflix to 50 million views in the first month. Brooks' empire became more than a company. It became a model for ethical capitalism. Business schools taught case studies. Politicians cited it in labor reform debates. But for Alexis, the real measure was simpler. The single mother who could afford her rent, the veteran server planning retirement, the young person finding dignity in work. That was the legacy. December 24, 2024. Exactly 1 year later, Alexis returned to the Evergreen Supper Club on Christmas Eve. This time, she didn't work. She sat at the bar, watching the staff thrive. Sophie managed the floor with effortless confidence. Marcus trained a new server with patience and kindness. Raymond's kitchen hummed with precision. Everything her father had hoped she'd build. Mrs. Patterson walked in with her family, now 81, still vibrant. There's my favorite waitress. They hugged like old friends. Changed the world yet? Mrs. Patterson asked with a knowing smile. Working on it. One restaurant at a time. At 9:47 p.m., the exact moment Michael had fired her 1 year ago, Alexis stood and raised her glass. The restaurant fell silent. Staff and customers turned to face her. A year ago, I stood in this exact spot and was told I was disposable. Today, I stand here knowing that no one is disposable. Everyone has value. Everyone deserves dignity. She raised her glass higher. Here's to the staff who held this place together when leadership failed them. Here's to the customers who stood up when it mattered. And here's to my father's lesson: true leadership isn't about power. It's about service. Merry Christmas, everyone. Thank you for teaching me what really matters. The restaurant erupted. Glasses raised. Sophie wiped tears. Marcus nodded with respect. Raymond emerged from the kitchen, raising his own glass. Alexis looked around at their faces. These people weren't her employees. They were her teachers. Her family. Her purpose. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But this wasn't revenge. This was justice. This was transformation. This was proof that the people you underestimate are often the ones who change everything. Michael Butler wanted to humiliate a waitress on Christmas. Instead, he taught a billionaire what really matters. He lost everything while she gained what money can't buy: purpose. A year later, the Evergreen wasn't just a restaurant. It was a revolution. And Alexis Brooks wasn't just a CEO. She was a leader who never forgot sore feet, stolen tips, and the dignity of honest work. So remember, you might be looking at someone who owns everything you think is yours. More importantly, you might be looking at someone who'll prove that kindness is stronger than cruelty. Always. The Evergreen model has been adopted by 2,000+ businesses nationwide. Over 50,000 workers have received raises, benefits, and dignity because of what started here. Sometimes it takes just one person to say, enough. Treat everyone with respect. You never know who they really are. What would you do with Alexis's power? Revenge or transformation? Drop your thoughts below. If this inspired you, like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear that kindness wins. Because somewhere, a Michael is underestimating an Alexis. And she's about to change everything. Thank you for watching. Remember, the person serving your coffee might own the cafe. Treat everyone like they matter. Because they do.